just to kind of reiterate from the chat, this session is being recorded. In the chat comments, you'll also see links to Insight Pacifica's LinkedIn, socials, and website pages. There are a few resources that we've put on the website that you can access, and we're hoping this webinar series will be another offering that, as part of the recordings, we'll edit and then upload for the broader development community and interested people to access and hear later. But really appreciate everyone coming in to listen. So we will get started. And one of the things that I think I'd just like to also give us a kind of a framing is Fiona, Marilyn, and myself, we're all kind of in this evaluation space, been working in it for a long time. And one of the offerings we're hoping to discuss today is this kind of sometimes perceived tension between what Fiona talked about as the indigenous localized space and ways of doing MEL in the Pacific with our own values, and kind of juxtaposed against the challenges that we face when we're dealing with Western evaluation systems and expectations from donors, and our kind of reflections on how those two worlds interact and the systems that underpin it. And yeah, so it could be interesting. So I'm going to start us off with the first kind of truth or myth. And I'll maybe start off with Marilyn's kind of thoughts and reflection on it, and then I'll ask Fiona to provide her comments. So here's the first one. Truth or myth: good MEL requires log frames with lots of indicators and related data collection tools. Marilyn, how do you feel about this statement?
Just sharing from my experience, I mean, yes, you have the log frames and the indicators, but I think initially when I started, most of the time you seem to, try and get it right at the very first, and trying to make it as perfect as possible. I'd say you don't complicate things. Yes, you need indicators. Yes, from my experience, having a theory of change, which is usually based on assumptions, that is clear. Yes, you would need indicators, but I think you shouldn't overcomplicate things. And sometimes you want to get it all right in the beginning, and you try to put in as many indicators as possible. I think you should just keep it simple. Keep it simple and have at least 2 or 3 key indicators, and the word that I want to stress here is key indicators, that make sense, because you can always, and from my experience, like recently working on a framework, there's at times there's you tend to put as many indicators as you can think of. But I think you need to just keep it simple. Yes, indicators are important, but you keep it simple, and just ensure that as long as the logic is clear in your mind, those 2 or 3 key indicators would help you sort of track that change. And I think one of those key indicators should include the qualitative, which is the why or the why not. And that is the main one that, as the change happens, you need to ask that why or why not. And most of the times, you ask the why, but you sometimes forget to ask the why not, which is also something that you need. So keep it simple. 2, 3 indicators. The why not should definitely be part of those indicators.
Have you ever experienced a M&E system that didn't have indicators, Marilyn?
From my experience, I haven't come across any system that did not have any indicators as yet. For me, like I had mentioned, having that theory of change, I mean, how I think about it is if you have a theory of change, you need to have at least 1 or 2 indicators to measure, because you need to understand and know what you're measuring at the different levels. So I mean, that's how I sort of think about it. I haven't come across it, but maybe there's someone who, would like to share their experience where there's no indicators, but I haven't come across it yet. No.
Thanks, Marilyn. Fiona, how do you feel about this statement?
Thanks, Allan. I think that's a very good statement. For me, based on which lens you're looking at, it could be a truth or a myth. So when I'm looking at um, the dominant discourse in the Western concept or lens of implementing project, then I would say it's a truth. But when I'm looking from an indigenous lens, I would say it's a myth because log frames and indicators doesn't define who we are, and it creates the tension of competitiveness in terms of implementing. Okay, I'm speaking from an indigenous or cultural perspective. It creates that competitiveness and time-bound sort of implementation of a particular intervention in communities. And you and I, as Pacific Islanders, know that in order to achieve um, smart, in order to achieve sustainable development outcomes that is based on achievement, based on our own definition, it requires time, and it doesn't based on Western concepts of log frames and indicators. And for example, we operate in a world where for the log frames and indicators is best suited for institutional organization, whereas it kind of undermines the ethical aspect of project implementation. We rushed into implementing log frames and indicators in a development context, and we overlooked the ethical component of it. For example, not being inclusive in the designing of the indicators and log frames. The log frames and indicators are designed based on whatever project we are implementing and whatever organization that we are representing, and it's aligned to the donor. So the power dynamics that's there. So in terms of looking at it from a local perspective and cultural perspective, there's the power imbalance in there. And when we implement such development intervention, it's for the particular project and not for our people. So I would say it's a myth when I'm looking at it from a cultural lens. Thank you. And over to you, Allan.
Thanks, Marilyn and Fiona. Okay, very, very interesting perspectives from both Marilyn and Fiona, and I agree with both their statements. Well, I would add on a few of my own. So I guess one of the reasons why we put this as a kind of a statement to provoke some discussion today is a lot of the donor partners that, or even for me personally, that I've worked with in the Pacific Islands, tend to um, gravitate towards a log frame as the main way of assessing a project or a program. Um, you know, worked with various donors over the years: Australia, New Zealand, EU, ADB, World Bank, and log frame is one mechanism, but it has been I would say almost institutional tool used to assess projects. So much so that a lot um, of our governments across the Pacific Islands and different ministries, as soon as you start talking to them about monitoring and evaluation, a lot of them automatically think of log frames, because I think there's this assumption that log frames are the only tool because donors used it for so long over the last 20, 30 years. It's become almost a systematic default that projects have to do. What I've learned over the years is that it's not just the only tool, and a lot of people that I engage with, Pacific Islanders and those at government, civil society, they've kind of been trained to think that log frames and having lots of indicators is what makes good MEL. One of the challenges, though, and the realities that I've come across when working with a lot of these programs and projects is you have programs that, I kid you not, can have between 40 to 80 indicators built in. And then over the course of 3 to 4 years, you find that they only manage to collect data on a third of it, or even sometimes half of it if you're lucky. And then there's almost half of the indicators don't have any data collection tools, or are too difficult, or they are not resourced. So Marilyn's initial point is correct. The fewer the indicators, the better. Something that is realistic, tailored to the organization, that you're resourced to be able to collect data on. And also remembering that logframe is only one tool, but thinking of indicators as kind of little markers that tell you how you're progressing. So Marilyn's other point around a theory of change, just kind of showing your kind of assumptions on where you're headed to with your program, what is it you want to achieve, your goal, your objective, the outcomes you'd like to achieve, and having these little markers that tell you, are you on track, and having some data collected against it is useful. Fiona's point as well around our Pacific ways of tracking and knowing and being is just as relevant. Log frames indicators are a Western way. And for those of you who are not aware, there is a document you can Google through SPC, which is called the Pacific Rebbilib. Fiona was very involved in helping bring that document together quite a few years ago. And for those of you who may be familiar or not familiar, the Rebbilib is a Micronesian stick chart for navigation back before the Pacific was colonized and we were still, in the olden days. It was a way of navigating across the Pacific Ocean, which is, such a big ocean, and they had these stick charts. And in essence, these stick charts just represented key points or islands along in the ocean, and it tracked ocean currents, and each navigator then built their own stick chart, understanding how currents moved and how they would then navigate these places to get to the next point of destination. And it was simple in the sense that it only had a few markers, and it had its own, and the navigators had this traditional knowledge passed from generation to generation, telling the next generation how you navigated it to get to the next set of islands across the Pacific. So in a sense, I would use that as, our Pacific way of navigating versus a Western way, which would probably be Google Maps, which has lots of anchor points that tells you turn left here, 100 meters, turn left here. There's so many little marker points, and we don't need that many when we had a good enough system that would just tell us, are we on track and are we getting there? So this is where I feel like the merger of the two worlds is quite important, where we need something that is balanced and tailored to our country needs. We're small islands, small governments, small NGOs, and working in different places with, small resources. And we don't need, big frameworks with lots of indicators. A lot of people automatically look to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and their indicators. They are useful at a certain level, but at some point we look at where we are in our context and what are we trying to track in terms of where we're going and what is useful to tell us. And, indicators are one measure, but there are other ways of us assessing our own progress. So I would probably put this as a little bit of a myth that needs to be broken, because as I said, I feel like it's a default that a lot of our people, particularly in government, have been using or being pushed to use this for the last 3 decades, that it seems to be something that we default to, but we need to kind of break the myth that there are other ways of tracking, and as Marilyn said, simple, a few things is better, I'll leave it at that, because I do want to get to the next truth or myth, and invite this time Fiona to start us off on the reflections, and then maybe Marilyn, and I'll facilitate the discussion afterwards. Okay, so the next truth or myth: quantitative data is more reliable and it is better than qualitative data. What do you feel about that statement, Fiona?
Thank you, Allan. I think it's a myth because we need both quantitative and qualitative data to make informed decisions. So in terms of making decisions using both evidence from quantitative data and qualitative data. In terms of making informed decision, we need both data or records to make informed decision, because without qualitative data, you wouldn't justify some of the numbers or figures that you're getting from quantitative data. So you need that qualitative data to make sense of those data that you're getting from quantitative data. Yes, it is understandable that we will have trends from the data, from quantitative data, but without supporting qualitative evidence, we wouldn't be able or in a better position to make informed analysis of the quantitative data that is being collected. So I believe that both quantitative and qualitative data is important in any monitoring and evaluation implementation or practice. So both of them are very important and valuable in implementing M&E initiatives. Thank you, and over to you, Allan.
Thanks, Fiona. Marilyn?
Thank you. I agree with Fiona. It's not about one being better than the other. It actually complements each other. And whenever you think of, quantitative is, the numbers. Qualitative is the story behind those numbers. And it is the why or the why not things are happening or not happening. It's the rich data. When you're working with communities, it's that rich data that just gives more depth to those numbers. So I agree with Fiona. Thank you.
Also, just to add on to what Marilyn shared, I think I know people who do quantitative or who prefer quantitative data or methods more would say, yes, it's true. You can also analyze quantitative data and make qualitative analysis out of it. But in terms of when we work in the development space, in terms of the human perspective into the data that you're collecting, I think it's better to collect qualitative data because you're putting the face behind that information that you're collecting. So having those qualitative information from humans, put the human face into whatever intervention that you're trying to improve in the communities or wherever it may be. Thank you. Over to you, Allan.
Thanks, Marilyn, Fiona. I have one follow-up question for each of you, so I'm going to ask one to Marilyn first. In your experience, Marilyn, working over the years, which one do you see as, people seem to gravitate towards, and would you be able to give us a reason why you think that is?
Kind of like similar to what Fiona had said, it's those stories. Yes, it's, whenever you do, especially in the development space, whenever you do interventions, at the end of the day, you want to ensure that the activities that you're doing is linked to, benefiting the target beneficiaries in that space. But I think it's, yes, the numbers are there, but it's the stories. When you have, like Fiona had said, when you have a face behind, the benefits that's coming from, attributable to that particular activity, it carries more weight. Not just to the donor, but it's the story. It's the story that holds more weight. Yes, the numbers will be there and it looks good, in your annual reports, but it's the stories that actually, coming from that development background, even for the donor, it's those stories that carry more weight and compared to those numbers. But yeah.
But why do you think they people push a lot of MEL systems I'm sure you as well have seen, they seem to just put more quantitative than anything else. Why do you think that is?
Well, with the Western system, like you mentioned, there's numbers, there's reports, and it's all sort of around the numbers. Yeah, I think it's just the traditional way of doing MEL. It's numbers, and whenever you think of MEL, you think frameworks, you think numbers. But in the Pacific context, it's not just the numbers, it's the stories, it's more than that. So yeah, I think in Pacific, like for MEL in the Pacific, it's a bit it's different from the pure, I would say, pure traditional MEL. It's all about numbers.
I think
Yeah,
you've started to go into the question I was going to ask Fiona is, in your experience, Fiona, with Pacific, what resonates better, the quantitative or the qualitative? And what approaches do you feel like links better with that?
yeah, I think both, because because most organizations would go for quantitative data because it's in terms of cost, and also because of time bound, the concept of time. But qualitative data, because it's expensive to do qualitative M&E, like evaluations, and also it's also involves a lot of time. But when you look at it from a cultural context or lens, the concept of time is the one that kind of creates that power dynamic. So I believe both of them are equally important. But if you're looking at inclusiveness and valuing our indigenous methodology and concept, the qualitative would ride over the quantitative, because uh, we are storytellers. We come from communities that we 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 pass information generation, I mean, down by generations, and also uh, we see things, and we, through our experience, we talk about it. We don't document it. Like when you're implementing, for example, intervention in communities, for example, water and sanitation. So when you're doing an evaluation on water sanitation, like for quantitative, you would go to the health aid post, and you'll get data records for to see there's a reduction in waterborne disease like diarrhea or stomach ache. You'll go to the community, like you get all this quantitative information. But in the community, like they observe and they'll tell you, okay, there's a reduction in this, or like for example, we have improved time for girls, because they would be the one usually fetching waters, and then they would go late for school, like class attendance. So in terms of their participation in school activities, so I'm trying to put that concept back into an example. Um, so you will hear those rich stories when you start talking to people in the communities, and based on the experiences of that intervention before and after. Thank you. Over to you, Allan.
Thanks, Fiona. And yes, absolutely. I think the points that are shared in the insights are particularly valuable. I think similar to the previous truth or myth that we had around indicators, a lot of the partners that I work with across the Pacific Islands, national all the way to subnational at the community level, there's this, again, deference to indicators, difference to quantitative data, this feeling that we need to count things. We need to be able to measure everything and say it in a percentage or say it in a number. Plus, quantitative data, you can generate nice looking graphs and pie charts and all sorts of stuff that people think that needs to go into reports. And it's a little bit more difficult. It can be done with qualitative. People don't know that you can do that with qualitative data. But there's a difference that we need to count everything. So again, coming back to the original point is raised, keeping things simple, few measures, collecting some data, but a balance of both quantitative and qualitative data. I really like Fiona's example talking about education. If you had a program or project that only had quantitative data, all you would have is, in this school, in this area, this is the total enrollment rate. This is the number of males. This is the number of females enrolled. This is the kind of uh, pass rate for from the examination. These are the numbers that had distinctions. That's all great quantitative data, but it doesn't really tell you why. So again, Fiona's example, if you really unpack the quantitative data and you saw that, female pass rates were lower than males, you need the qualitative aspects to be able to explain, as Fiona said, maybe, the girls need more chores. That's the way the kind of community life is, that they have more expectation and demands on their time, which means they have less time to study as compared to the males. Or, you might find out reasons that, overall, despite having all of these educational programs, children are not passing. And you'd ask the question why. You dig into it, and then you'd find out, the villages from which these children come from do not have electricity, which means that they cannot study late into the night. Once it gets dark, they only have kerosene lamps, which make late night studying difficult. So, as Marilyn said at the beginning, you need the story behind the numbers is supplemented through your qualitative data. So you need a balance of both. So again, this is another myth that quantitative data is more reliable and it's better. That's not quite the case. The last truth or myth: Pacific MEL only focuses on values, relationships, and culture, but this has no relevance in our modern monitoring and evaluation space in terms of how it's practiced or even the rigor behind it. Is that true? Marilyn, did you want to start us off?
I think this is a myth, and this is based on a recent project that we had just completed. Maybe Allan can add to that, but in this project, we worked with the indigenous organization where we sort of married the two. And as you are all aware, with donor funding, with any donor funding, you have certain rules, you have requirements that you need to report back to the donor. So this would include, global standards like the 6 OECD or DAC criteria. You would have the, ensuring that the activities and the results are attributable to your particular activity. You also have, reporting that aligns with the donors' end of financial, the financial year. And then you have also independent evaluators that come in and verify the data that's collected. So in this particular project that we did, working with this indigenous organization, we took that criteria or the Western criteria, and we aligned it in the in the Itoke or took on an indigenous approach for this particular project. So in the case where we're talking about sort of quarterly KPIs that we needed, from the Western or donor expectations or deliverables, what we did was we had Talanoa based check-ins where we had, the OECD DAC reporting criteria. We had culturally grounded key evaluation questions. Where we had attribution analysis, we had contribution, because in this particular instance, when you're talking about Rutuman and Itoke communities, there's also government, you have other departments, you have NGOs that are also contributing towards these communities. So we took on a contribution analysis. And then where there's external evaluation, we have the Vevo Sakiyanga community or sense-making discussions, where we have standard indicators. We co-developed a Itoke well-being rubric together with the team, which has 5 cultural dimensions. So we sort of, I guess, mirrored the Western, but more in a Itoke context. Allan, you want to add to that?
I'll only give a few of my insights on the statement. I'll give a few things at the end, but I'm also conscious I do want to get to some Q&A. Fiona, over to you.
I think it's a myth because at the moment we are currently using both systems simultaneously and in parallel, and in the context of strength-based approach, justice-based approach, and in being inclusive, we've used both Pacific MEL approaches as well as formal evaluation approaches or practice, because I think using both of them in parallel or simultaneously informs each other in terms of process, in terms of implementation and design of intervention. Yes, Pacific MEL only focuses on, it kind of focuses on our relationality, our values, principles, and culture, because that's the way we are in the Pacific in terms of the way we communicate and make sense of our environment, and mainly of how the intervention is impacting us. However, in terms of the formal evaluation practice, we do still need to implement Western methodologies and concept, and use the Pacific MEL concept to inform each other. I think I'm repeating myself, but in a different way. So I think I would say that both of them are relevant, and why we need to implement both of them is we need to create the condition or the environment that our differences or our lived experiences are working together and are engaging respectfully, so that, because it's a diverse region, and also we work in diverse cultures and communities, not just in the Pacific, but also embracing other people who come and work with us, as well as the Western concepts. So creating those conditions that allow our differences and our different cultures and values to operate in that environment. So yeah, it's a myth. Thank you, and over to you, Allan.
Thanks both, Fiona, and I'll just give one or two quick statements, and then I'm going to stop the screen share, and then open up to the floor if people have questions. But yes, my experience has been that there is a perception from outside evaluation or Western evaluation, in the sense that all this discussion in Pacific around Pacific ways of doing MEL is great, but it's these things around the culture and values, really great, but you keep it separate. And if not, the specific tools we look at when we talk about Pacific evaluation, maybe these things like Talanoa, Talk Story, they're great, but they're little tools that you embed within the broader MEL system. And I think it's shifting that perception, from saying that Pacific MEL is just a tool. Talanoa is a tool, a way of doing data collection only for qualitative, just for like a focus group style discussion. So instead of calling it focus group, we use the local word, which is Talanoa. I think that's a misconception. I think this shift from exactly what Fiona said, the principles and the values and the kind of relationships, these are critical in the framing of the whole MEL system or the whole evaluation system. It cannot be a MEL system that's designed externally. The key questions that we want to ask and find answers to are set externally. The tools for how we will collect information on data to answer these questions are going to be done externally. And then we'll just use local Pacific people and use some of these Talanoa methods as a way of supplementing the data collection. But then the analysis will be done externally. And then the report will be produced, again, externally. We need to shift that whole framing to be underpinned by if it is for the Pacific, it is done with the Pacific, underpinned by Pacific values of the collective good. In Fiji they use this term of solivaki, the more holistic nature. this concept of reciprocity in the Pacific, this concept of gifting, the gifting of knowledge. So when we come into communities and we ask them to share insight, to share intelligence around why things are working, or to collect data, they're gifting us with their time, with their knowledge. We need to re-gift back to thank them. So this concept of reciprocity, of being co-designed or co-led, all of these comes into the framing and should be underpinned by our Pacific values, so that both the key questions that are designed, the the methods that we use to collect the information and data. And that's not to say that they aren't useful methods. There are definitely useful methods out there that we can draw from in terms of tools, data collection tools that are quite, very useful, that a lot of them are used from Western. So I think you can have a balance of both the co-analysis of the data and the information that we find to produce things. The products should be co-owned, so that it's not perceived as a kind of a one-way extractive system, but a system that is mutually beneficial for all parties. So I think that's why this is where the values are underpinned and need to be clarified right at the beginning. So yes, I definitely feel that you can have Pacific embedded within a evaluation system, or within a monitoring evaluation system, and it can contribute to strengthening both the practice and the rigor. And that's one of the messages that I talk a lot about these days. Those were three quick truth or myth statements, and a few insights from Marilyn, Fiona, and myself. I know we didn't go into much depth, but we tried to give as much of our kind of thoughts and feedback from our experiences as specific evaluators. I'm going to start with screen share and then open up for some Q&A for people in the room. Please feel free to either speak directly or to put comments in the chat.
I've got one, if that's all right. So yeah, hi, I'm Kate Lanyon from the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. Thank you to everyone for your time today. It's been a really interesting conversation. I guess my question is more just around, as the three of you have talked about a lot, the way that MEL is often framed is that its whole purpose is to go back to the donor, right? For them to understand, we've given this money out, what's been the impact? But I'd really love to hear if you've got any examples you can draw on of what the flip side of that looks like, where that purpose of the MEL itself is really kind of driven and owned by the communities who've received the funding, and what that kind of looks like as an alternative to that typical model. Thanks.
Looking at the two panelists, if they have a response. I have one response. Fiona or Marilyn, do you want to say anything? Or do you want me to wait first?
Yeah, I'll try and answer your question. So in the recent project that I had mentioned, the donor was supporting the development of the MEL framework and system of an indigenous organization. So it was really built for them. And in that case, like you had mentioned, like when you're coming from the donor side, and for me, like from this experience, it was also, because I was in the development space for, so long, my mind is kind of like wired, towards the development space. So being part of this project was really interesting because for me, you have these jargons, JEDC, climate change, When we worked with them, they were like, no, that's a donor word, We don't use that word. We want to use this word. So even for me working closely together with them to develop tools and frameworks and products that were for them to use. So at the end of the day, and because the donor that we're working with was very flexible, and at the end of the day, they understood it was for them. So they didn't expect something that was sort of tagged donor friendly. So at the end of the day, it was whilst I'd mentioned there was the different criteria that the donor was expecting, we had to work with the organization to use and sort of develop, in some cases, like new measurement tools that worked for them. And at the end of the day, it is for them. It was, yeah, it was a really interesting project because for us coming in, and working together with them to co-create this system that was built for them. Yeah, we had to get rid of some, jargons. They're like, no, this makes sense for us. I had mentioned some words when I had answered that question initially. We have Vevosaki Yanga, which is where, the relevant Itoke organizations, including the government, would come together and discuss, where have we moved? Where have we progressed? Based on this well-being rubric. I mean, it's very early stages, but this was something that we had to build for them. And at the end of the day, because you're sort of in that mindset, it was a bit hard, like, Jetsi, climate change. They're like, no, cut, like, this makes sense for us. So yeah, I mean, it was very interesting for us coming in and working with them as well to develop something that was custom made to them, a system that they, with their capabilities, they would be able to implement it. And at the end of the day, I mean, for us coming in as consultants, it was really, we want to develop a product where, we want to see them use, and we want to see them continue, getting data that they would use to make, decisions, and, et cetera, and sort of, using the data for decision making. Yeah.
Fee, did you want to add anything to that?
While working with an international non-government organization in PNG, like 10 years ago, one of the things that we did when we do needs assessments or situational analysis in communities, because the situational analysis and needs assessment is designed with the community in terms of they map and document like the number of households, the number of water sources, whether it's safe, areas that are safe, and all that. So when we do such things with community leaders, youths, and men and women in the community, it's sort of an empowerment activity because they themselves get to see the number of people that they have in the community. They get to record they have like the population of their community and the next communities, and then it kind of so after everything, the report is then presented back to the community leaders, who then use those reports to work with the district offices in the province or the local level governments to get additional support to help them with any community intervention like mobilization for spotting initiatives during Christmas and all that, because they have the data and they have the information. So I've like in terms of doing such initiatives and many activities with community leaders is also a good way to empower and build their capacity and also get them to know their communities. Because, for example, in PNG, the communities are so diverse in terms of like one LLG, local level government, speaks one language, and then you go to another LLG, they speak another language. So in terms of such initiatives, we kind of connect like cultures together and get them to work together in terms of having identifying their own strengths and weaknesses in the community and being able to present those information to their government officers to seek additional support. Yeah. Thank you. Over to you, Allan.
Thanks, Fiona. I also noted Kyle's comments. So this might be the last statement to try and respond to Kate and also answer Kyle's. So very quickly, I think, Kate, your point, and I think Kyle's comment also speaks directly to, yes, donors have driven a lot of what has shaped evaluation thinking in the Pacific. When you give money, there is automatically already a power imbalance. So I think it speaks directly to power and power imbalance. So there's a bit of a caveat that, yes, the example I'm about to give is not for everyone because it's very difficult to push back on donors. But I do have an example. I won't name which community I worked with, but there was a community I worked with once, and I'll give a fictional just to kind of replace. So say it's a community in Fiji, and it has Plan Australia coming in to work with this community to put water tanks, and then it's got Red Cross coming in to do some disaster work, and then it's got Habitat for Humanity coming in to do work on housing. So it's got various NGOs and partners coming in doing all sorts of project stuff. So with this community, one of the things we were brought in to only work with one of them, but what we did was we developed this framework for the community that assessed a whole dimension of what a community well-being looks like. So it had whole dimensions of what does improved education look like, and what does improved health look like, and what does improved housing look like, and all the things that were important to this community. Now, if I was to flip the slider, as you said, what was the exact opposite? What if this community used that to then assess the partners that were coming into them to say, you've been working in this area, have we actually improved education? So all these partners that work in education, we don't really see education improve. You've been doing stuff on housing. Housing, has it really improved? Who's contributed to it? So it's almost flipping the script to put in place a framework where they assess those who come in to work with them. But again, that's an extreme example. I think speaking to Kyle's example, when you work at an organizational level, similar principle, it works best when you are able to have programs or projects that align with the organization's strategic plan. Because in a sense, the organization has preset, these are our goal and objectives in the areas that we feel we want to make a difference. If your program or project is aligned, so I think what was Kyle's thing, any best practice, then the M&E system then collects data that suits the donor partner, but also feeds into to monitoring your strategic plan. And I think this is the challenge, because sometimes organizations or NGOs that have very little power have a strategic plan, but then the donor partner says, look, I've got some money, can you bolt on this program? You're an NGO that does work around mental health and something, but how about doing some water tanks on the side while you're at it? So it's very difficult to work with a local organization to develop their M&E capacity and get them to measure what they want to measure. And the best way to do it is ensure that the program aligns with the strategic objective or direction. So that way you're collecting data that is mutually beneficial, suits both purposes. So the closer you can align with where they're heading in their direction, the better it is for everyone. I think that's probably my best practice example in responding to Kyle's question. We're 2 minutes over. I see people are starting to drop off. I really hope that today's session provided some useful reflections and insights. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists, Fiona and Marilyn. This Insight Pasifika will have another session next month, and we'll have the team put something up on the next episode sometime soon. But a big vinaka from myself here in Suva, and look forward to you joining us again next month. Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allan. Thank you, Marilyn.